The Beatles, arguably the biggest rock stars of all time. Beatlemania had these boys reaching a level of fame that was unheard of, and to this day we still haven't really seen replicated, aside from maybe Michael Jackson. So, what do you do when you reach an unprecedented level of fame for your music? You make a movie, of course. The Beatles made 4 movies over the course of their time together as a band. A Hard Day's Night, Help, Magical Mystery Tour, and Yellow Submarine. Today, we will be looking at all 4 of these movies to see how each one of them reflects where the band was in their careers, as well as where pop culture was as a whole. It should be noted that we will only be looking at narrative features starring all 4 of the Beatles playing fictionalized versions of themselves. So no tribute films, no biopics, and no documentaries. Alright, with that out of the way, let's get started with... It's been a hard day's night. Now, this was the only one of these movies that I had actually seen before making this video. I remember years ago I watched it with my dad, and I remember loving it, so I was curious to see how it would hold up, and lo and behold, this movie's still great. It was shot using a very laid-back, mockumentary style inspired by the French New Wave, and depicts all 4 of the Beatles navigating their lives of newfound fame and success, and they all seem to be having a pretty good time with it. But things get complicated when, for some reason, Paul decides to bring his grandpa along, and let me tell you, this guy is wild. This is also where we get this iconic moment.
Hello, grandfather. Hello. He can talk then, can he? Of course he can talk, he's a human being, isn't he? Well, if he's your grandfather, who knows?
And we get the beginning of a running gag that, for some reason, my dad and I still quote to this day.
He's a nice old man, isn't he? He's very clean.
From that point on, the movie just becomes a mission to stop Paul's grandpa from ruining everything.
Well, you got me here, so do your worst. Or be God, I'll take one of you with me.
There's tons of funny jokes in this movie. You really get a sense of all of the band's very unique sense of humors. I will say some of the boys are better actors than others. John and George in particular seem very comfortable in front of the camera, where Paul just kind of seems happy to be there. Various Beatles songs are peppered all throughout the movie, and if you're a big fan like I am, this will not be a problem for you. The movie is something of a musical, and this is a trait all of these films share. All in all, A Hard Day's Night is a pretty great movie. It's very simple, but that allows for the cast to really shine and show off their charm and humor. This is a great comfort movie. I'd really recommend it. Alright, we're starting off strong. What's next? Help! I need somebody help! Alright, now, A Hard Day's Night was a pretty simple movie, meant to just feel like you're palling around with the guys as they go about their lives. So, naturally, you'd assume that the follow-up, Help, would be pretty similar, right? Well, the plot of Help involves an obscure Eastern cult who discovers that a sacred ring that they need to commit a human sacrifice has now disappeared and attached itself to Ringo Starr, who will die if he does not get it off. So now the cult has to track down the Beatles and steal the ring for themselves so they can perform their human sacrifice, all while the Beatles try to figure out how to get the ring off of Ringo. Yeah, this one's kind of weird. The story is obviously much more present in this one than the last, and the whole movie kind of just has a really odd tone. Every scene feels like a very subdued SNL sketch. You got Ringo getting thrown into multiple different tests to try to get the ring off of him. You got Paul accidentally shrinking himself down to the size of an ant. There's a fight scene where John and George beat up some cult members who broke into their house, and I'm pretty sure I saw George literally eating a cymbal in one scene. Then, in my personal favorite scene in the movie, the moment where someone tries to funnel a tube into the room where the Beatles are in so they can poison them, only for the boys to grab the tube, start goofing around with it, and throw it outside. This entire movie feels like a feature-length shitpost, and I guess in that sense, the Beatles were certainly ahead of their time. Once again, a lot of musical sequences in this movie, but this time they're actually interwoven with the plot. So now you will have all this crazy, important stuff going on, meanwhile the guys are just playing their little song like they're not about to die. It's honestly kind of hilarious. Now, it may sound like I'm kind of dogging on this movie, but the truth is, I still really like it. The insanity just kind of adds to its charm for me, and while it's certainly less coherent than its predecessor, I still think it's just as funny. I mean, this whole time, I've been showing you clips from the movie, and every single one of them looks like it's from a different thing. It's honestly hilarious. If I had to sum it up, I would say that Help is a ridiculous and unpredictable follow-up to A Hard Day's Night, but I still really like it, partly because of how insane it is.
Well, don't look at me.
Alright, now at this point in time, the Beatles had just announced that they would stop touring forever. This allowed them to get more experimental and grand with their music, which made way for albums like Revolver, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and of course, the Magical Mystery Tour. When this movie was made, there was a bit of a shift going on in the film industry. A growth of post-war radicalism started to manifest itself in all the new film that was being produced in the West. This created newfound interest in two different styles of filmmaking: realism and documentary, or avant-garde and experimental. And I will let you take one guess as to which category this movie falls into. Well, I guess movie isn't really the right word. This is actually a TV special. It takes the form of something more akin to a very wacky, abstract TV anthology drama, except much more comedy than drama, if we're being real. John Lennon had stated that if stage shows were out, then they wanted something to replace them, and television was the obvious answer. Oh, and one other thing about this one that separates it from the rest, this is the only movie today that was actually directed by all four of the Beatles. Yes, John, Paul, George, and Ringo are all directors on this, which is very apparent from the fact that this movie is easily the strangest of the bunch. This movie is more of a series of sketches and music videos, all strung together with a very thin plot, which I will now describe to you. The boys get on a bus with a bunch of strangers, taking them all on a trip called the Magical Mystery Tour. Did you think I would keep going? No, that's it. That's all you get. What follows is a series of random little scenes and vignettes involving a very colorful cast of characters joining the main four. You got this sergeant who has multiple scenes dedicated to him speaking, even though you can never understand a single thing he says.
You let anybody talk it on. You let anybody move, you could have saw it. He let the car ball. He let the charge out and get us in. He let the first pitch in. And he came to tour in like in here.
You got Ringo's aunt, who actually has some pretty funny banter with her nephew.
You ain't coming away with me anymore.
Who bought the tickets for this trip? I did.
Yeah, with my money.
I bought
yeah,
them,
I gave
right?
you the money.
I'm
yeah.
taking you out.
Yeah,
You're not
yeah.
taking me anyway.
I gave you the money,
Remember
darling.
that.
You got the courier and hostess of the bus, and plenty of other random little side characters. Actually, the main guys aren't really present here at all. More often than not, you'll just see them playing some random little background characters in some scenes, and whenever they're on the bus, just as themselves, they really don't get much to do. It's very clear that the band just wanted to make something completely different and wacky with Magical Mystery Tour, and in that aspect, yeah, they succeeded. However, as an actual special that you can sit down and watch, is not great. There isn't enough of a narrative to follow any actual common through line, but the sketches and scenes themselves aren't funny enough to watch it as like a funny comedy special. I can't really imagine anyone who isn't a diehard Beatles fan watching this, let alone really enjoying it. But hey, at least the music's still good. We all live in a yellow submarine. Now, Yellow Submarine is a special case because this one is an animated children's special. That means you get all of the weirdness and psychedelia you've come to expect from the late stage Beatles, all nice and wrapped up and packaged for a children's audience. But honestly, I think it works pretty well. Yellow Submarine tells the story of a town called Pepperland, inhabited by a bunch of music lovers. They get invaded by the anti-music Blue Meanies, and the mayor sends for help from the Beatles, who have to board the titular Yellow Submarine to come save the town and stop the Blue Meanies. Now, I'll start by saying that I really like the animation here. It looks very odd and the proportions are all off, but it's so unique and iconic. I love it. It often gets close to the line of being really weird and creepy, but it never really crosses that. I do think it is worth noting that the Beatles are not necessarily great voice actors, but I honestly think that makes the movie better. All these insane things will be happening, but their delivery will still just be so mundane. I think it's perfect.
Well, maybe we should call a road service.
Can't no road.
And we're not subscribers.
Subscribers. Ooh.
This movie is quite funny. However, sometimes I do have a hard time determining whether or not that was intentional. Either way, it's very fun. But hey, what about all that weird, wacky stuff we've come to expect from a Beatles movie? Well, that is all still very much here. The band seems to live in an apartment complex where all the rooms are occupied by things that the human brain just cannot comprehend. There's a scene that manipulates time in a way that would make Christopher Nolan blush. And in that same scene, there's a part where they just stop the movie and count to 60 to show you how long a minute is. Yeah, this movie's still very weird. The music video portions in this vary quite a lot as well. Sometimes they actually serve a purpose in forwarding the story, and other times they just stop the movie entirely to play a song and go on a little acid trip. It's wonderfully inconsistent. Now, I know it might not sound like I have too much to say about this one compared to the others, and that's because I don't. This movie is just cute, strange, wacky, and funny, and I think John Lennon would agree with me. Lennon said, "I think it's a great movie. It's my favorite Beatle movie. Sean loves it now. All the children love it." So yeah, that's about it. This was a nice one to end on. I think the Beatles movies work really well as not just a capsule of the band's trajectory, but of the culture as a whole. We start with something very simple and traditional, yet extremely fun and charming. Then, as time goes on, we start to get more experimental and abstract, pushing the limits of what does and doesn't make sense. Getting weirder and weirder until we finally find a balance between absurdism and sincerity. I think watching all of these movies back to back to back to back really helped put into perspective how the Beatles affected pop culture and vice versa. And while I wouldn't recommend watching them all in a row like I did, especially if you're not a Beatles fan, I would recommend giving at least a couple of them a chance, because they're great little time capsules. Here's my ranking of all 4 movies if you're interested. Thank you so much for coming on this journey with me. I will see you around. Goodbye.
Hey, look at John, will ya?
What's the matter, John Love? Blue meanies?
Newer and bluer meanies have been sighted within the vicinity of this theatre. There's only one way to go out.
How's that?
Singing!